Welcome, fellow storytellers, to our webinar, 5 Great Stories That Prove the Power of Business Storytelling. I'm Paul Furiga, President and Chief Storyteller at WordWrite. I'm so glad to be with you, whether you're watching this live or you're watching it later. I want to get started by a little audience participation. Now, we're on a webinar, so nobody can see you and participate as you want or as you don't. We're going to get right into storytelling. Once upon a time, I'd like you to consider those 4 words, and in your mind, what are the earliest memories in your life? What pictures, what sounds, what experiences come to your mind when you think about those 4 words? Once upon a time. Take just a minute and see if we get any responses here. All right. I love it. Kelly says, my grandma telling us made up silly stories on her porch swing. I love that. Another answer, common we get, a Grimm's fairy tale. Excellent. I love that. Yeah. Another choice that I'll often hear is Disney, right? You have to be of a certain age, I guess, for some of the Disney stories that I knew growing up. But if you have kids today, you probably can sing every song of Frozen, and you've got all the associated merchandise, including books that go with that, right? Okay, you may be asking yourself, as you ponder this question or the answers we've already gotten, why would we begin a webinar about great business stories by talking about early childhood memories? Your answers provide the direction for us, because stories are something that we were exposed to early in life and have followed us all the way through. Stories are the connective tissue that help us make sense of the world. And today, I hope we all come to understand at the end of our time together that stories are not just for fairy tales. Stories are the most powerful form of business communication that produces the best results. And the little memory test we just engaged in is one of the great measures of how that's possible. And why is this important, right? Well, take a look at this artwork here that we have on the screen. It's called Comfortably Numb. It was done by an artist named Nadia Collazo-Lorenz. A few years ago, she was Distinguished Artist in Residence at Grand Valley State University in Michigan. It's 9 feet tall. It's 45 feet long. It's made up of these things that people used to read called magazines and newspapers, as well as tablets and smartphones and other screens. This is her depiction of the information overload that we face as human beings on a daily basis. And more important and directly relevant to our time together, this is the clutter that we have to cut through if we hope to communicate what the audience is most important to us. We have to break through somehow. Stories are the best way to do that. I like to say stories are the original communication medium, no batteries required. All you need is a brain and an imagination. Well, let's talk about that brain for a minute, right? On this screen here, we've got a visual explanation of the importance of storytelling. Let's start at the top here. Number 1, stories activate empathy. Perhaps you've heard this truism in business, that people decide rationally and they buy emotionally. Guess what? Science shows that's actually true. And as we go kind of counterclockwise over to the left here, there's a reason for that. And the reason is, unlike what we saw in the last slide, the digital clutter that we face on a daily basis, our brains are old, eons old, way before Facebook, way before Twitter, way before texting. Not only are our brains old, there's a portion of our brain that's quite literally referred to frequently as the old brain, or the limbic system, that's responsible for things like keeping us alive, our heart beating, breathing, et cetera, et cetera. That part of the brain makes our brains the original energy saving appliance. The average human being, 3% of their body weight is their brain. But that brain is consuming 23% of your energy. So this is why college students fall asleep in the middle of boring lectures, and why we have such a hard time paying attention. Stories enable us to focus on what's important, including not only a clear head, but as you see here at the bottom, connecting our attention to the motivation to do the right thing. Now, one of the ways that stories do that, and we know this from our little exercise and also our life experience, is because our brains can't get enough of them. It's like a meal or a snack that never ends. One of the most amazing things in the last 20 or 30 years, with the advancement of scientific technology like magnetic resonance imaging machines, we can actually look inside our brains and see the impact of story. We'll talk about my book on this topic a little bit later today. One of the examples I have in the book is this Princeton experiment that was done, where they put a young woman into an MRI tube and she told her worst prom story. And then they brought in test subjects, put them inside the MRI, and played her story for them. What the researchers discovered through this experiment is that there was a mind meld. Now, maybe some of you are not aware of the great 1930s dance team, Rodgers and Astaire, but with the storyteller and the story audience, when there's a great story, it's in sync, in rhythm. And what the researchers discovered in this experiment is that the brain waves of the audience exposed to this intriguing story match the brain waves of the person sharing the story. Folks, this is the power that's right there for you in your organization if you're sharing the right story. And we're going to talk about what that right story is in a minute. But first, I'm a professional storyteller, so you would expect me to tell you how great stories are. Lots of folks who are not famous for anything having to do with story, oh, I don't know, maybe they're interested in outer space now, also believe that storytelling is really important, like Jeff Bezos. Or how about one of my favorite authors, Daniel Pink? Love his book, To Sell is Human. Don't like this concept here in this quote, corporate Sominex, but I will tell you, in a long career of writing for other people, I have been forced at various times to write corporate Sominex. Maybe you have been forced to write corporate Sominex, or perhaps you've been exposed to it. Regardless, one of the reasons why we formed WordWrite and one of the reasons why we do the work we do today is because we do not want to be in the business of writing or sharing content that can be described as corporate Sominex. The late Anita Roddick, founder of The Body Shop, I love this quote. Even in pre-industrial societies, storytelling was critical. Think about it. Before a society could write, there were still stories. That's how people knew what was important. But that's also relevant today, isn't it? We're coming out of this, whatever it is we want to call it, this pandemic, endemic now. We're trying to be engaged at all levels in our organizations. Wouldn't it be great If everybody in our organizations understood the overall purpose, the overall story of our organization, and as well could share the story of their role in the overall story. Great food for thought. Now, I suspect that for probably all of us who are in the webinar, we are on the hook to deliver results. Business leaders have to show that their work is creating value for their organizations. Guess what? Stories do that because the best stories are memorable and timeless, and they transcend culture. If you came to me and said, Paul, I hear that WordWrite got a new client, and I said to you in response, yes, it's a David and Goliath story. You do not have to be a biblical scholar to understand that's the underdog story. That our new client is a smaller organization taking on the established giant. Now, in our work with our clients, archetypal stories like the one I just shared are critical to the success of sharing our client stories. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. First and foremost, though, understand that stories like that produce great results. The best, in fact, because they're easily remembered. I don't have to explain David and Goliath. And folks, there's thousands, literally thousands of those kind of archetypal stories that create what we call synaptic shortcuts that make it much, much easier for people to understand the value of your organization. Now, at the end of the webinar today, we're going to provide a tool for you to dig into this for yourself. In our work over the last 2 decades at WordWrite, what we've come to learn in working with our clients is there's a very specific business story that stands above the rest. We call it the capital S story. We call it that because, while as business leaders, we're sharing all kinds of stories all day long in all kinds of contexts. We need somebody to do something. We need to report financial results. Whatever the case may be, those are small S stories. The communication is delivered, the action is taken, it's over. The capital S story stands above the rest because it answers 4 fundamental questions that define the character and the nature of your organization. Why would somebody buy from you? Why would they work for you? Why would they invest in you if that's important? And why would they partner with you? Folks, these are the answers that your most important audiences need to have in their minds if they're going to engage with you in a sustainable and long-term relationship. All right, Paul, so that's what a capital S story is. Give me an example. Show me what you mean. So here are 5 common examples. I just want you to know, these are not the only kinds of capital S stories that exist. As I said just a few minutes ago, there are quite literally thousands. But there are categories that are common, and here are 5. Your origin, how your organization got started. What's the dream or passion that animates people on a daily basis to come to work, to deliver great results for whatever audience that your organization serves? Maybe there's been a phenomenal innovation, a product, a service. Perhaps your organization was ahead of its time and had an idea or a concept that's finally come of age. And of course, you could be like 3M. They were trying at this great chemical products company to invent something else, and instead they came up with Post-it notes, an epiphany, right? Now, I will tell you, to kind of bring this to life a little bit more, one well-known company that is a great example of all of these stories. In fact, think of it as chapters in their book, their overall story, is Apple. In the beginning, it's Steve Jobs and Woz. And they had this dream and this passion, right? Think of the 1984 Super Bowl commercial, which is nearly 40 years old, but is considered one of the finest examples of Super Bowl commercials ever, where they're this little organization and they're fighting against the overwhelming dominant organization that's controlling people's lives. Innovation. Now, the iPod wasn't the first MP3 player, but it was the most successful. And what came right after that? The iPhone, a coming of age. Who would have thought that you would put songs in your phone, for crying out loud? Now, today, we put everything in our phones, don't we? And certainly, along the way, there have been other innovations from Apple that kind of changed the landscape. I mean, consider the iPhone. If you ever pay attention to how Apple's doing, an enormous share of their overall revenue comes from a phone when they started kind of as a computer company, didn't they? Oh, so that's an example for you of how capital S stories work. What might be your organization's capital S story? Give it some thought as we move on here. This is the point of the webinar, and I'll tell you, we not only have 5 great capital S stories for you, we have 6. We have a bonus today. So let's take a look at some great capital S stories of well-known and not so well-known organizations to help you understand this concept a little bit better, and ideally so that you've not only been educated and entertained today, but you come away from this webinar with useful information that you can employ in your own organization. In a dark corner of a landmark San Antonio club known as the St. Anthony Club, the CEO and the lawyer were huddled over drinks. The subject matter matched the dark mood. The CEO was folding his company, and he needed his lawyer's help to do that. After a period of time, the CEO picked up a cocktail napkin and a pen, and he started to write on the napkin. First, he drew a triangle, then the words San Antonio, Dallas, and Houston. He pushed the napkin over to the lawyer. The lawyer looked at it and nodded. Anybody know what story this is? A great corporate origin story? Guess is welcome. All right, I see we got a few coming here. Southwest. Yes, that is the origin story of Southwest. This is a great consumer brand with a wonderful capital S story, and they live it today, folks. 2021 was the 50th anniversary of Southwest Airlines. My wife and I have a daughter and son-in-law who live in Tempe, Arizona. We flew Southwest. We get on the plane. As you can see, I did not use my cocktail napkin for its intended purpose. I had to save it because look at how this company celebrates its origin capital S story. Darn it, it's the 50th anniversary, and there's the napkin, there's the triangle, there's the sketch. Let's take a look at another example. Now, some of you, especially if you're at home, maybe you're wearing some Nike apparel, maybe you really like Nike. Guess what? It's not about the shoes. It's about the story. On the left-hand side there is a gentleman that some of you may know and probably most of you don't. That's because he died in 1975. His name is Steve Prefontaine, better known as Pre. In 1975, Time magazine put him on its cover and said that in the 1976 Olympics, he was going to win every distance race that he entered. What most people don't know is that Pre was one of the first sponsored athletes in the world, and his sponsor was Nike. He was training in Oregon, which is where Nike is headquartered, for the Olympics, and he was tired one night coming home from practice, and unfortunately, in the fancy sports car that he had bought with his first endorsement check from Nike, he had a fatal automobile crash. Now, in the lower right-hand side here of the slide, you see the memorial to Pre, which is maintained by Nike. Now, why would Nike do that? Well, within the Nike organization, there's a very special job title. Ekin. And Ekin is Nike spelled backwards. Now, in a lot of companies, those folks might have a title like regional or district sales manager or something like that. But at Nike, these folks are the evangelists for the story that makes Nike what it is. It's very prestigious to become an Ekin. If you're chosen, you go to Oregon. You visit the site where Pre died. In the upper right-hand corner there, that's the old track at Hayward Field, where when he was a runner at Oregon for the legendary track coach Bill Bowerman, who later became the co-founder of Nike, that's where Pre first established himself as a great runner. In the top and the middle, you can see that at the end of their training, one of the rites of passage for Ekins is having the swoosh tattooed somewhere on their body. This is one of the ones that's suitable for work done. Some aren't, let me tell you. Now, in the bottom and the middle, it doesn't just end there. Employee number 4 at Nike is a gentleman named Nelson Ferris. For most of his career, Nelson Ferris had the title of corporate storyteller. You see, the Nike story was so important to the company, they put someone in charge who'd been there practically from the beginning to make sure that new Nike employees knew what the story was. To understand the roots in making great athletics possible through the shoes, and later on the accessories and tools, everything that Nike makes today, and how that pulls through to today. Well, let's take a look at one storyteller's view on this. We mentioned Steve Jobs a little bit earlier. Let's hear what he has to say about the Nike.
But the best example of all, and one of the greatest jobs of marketing the universe has ever seen is Nike. Remember, Nike sells a commodity. They sell shoes. And yet, when you think of Nike, you feel something different than a shoe company. In their ads, as you know, they don't ever talk about the products. They don't ever tell you about their air soles and why they're better than Reebok's air soles. What does Nike do in their advertising? They honor great athletes and they honor great athletics. That's who they are. That's what they are about.
I love that little clip. You know, in the beginning, Jobs was probably not a great storyteller, but he became one. He became iconic. And this is from one of the most important talks he ever gave when he came back to Nike, 1997, after being in the wilderness at this little organization you may have heard of. They kind of turned into a behemoth called Pixar. Maybe you've heard of that company. Regardless, you can find the entire speech. It's called the Think Different speech. It's on YouTube. It's definitely worth watching. For our purposes today, though, what he has to say about the shoe company is really interesting, because here is a great storyteller and somebody who really understands brand, analyzing another brand. And part of what he was sharing when he made this speech was that he wanted Apple and Apple's story to become more like Nike's story. And if anybody's familiar with the Think Different campaign, which was considered one of the most successful 20th century ad campaigns, that's what it was all about. You know, pictures of Gandhi and pictures of John and Yoko Ono. Think different, right? Really creating a great story. Got another great example for you. Here's something really important about great capital S stories. They evolve over time. So I'm going to show you a couple of videos here to show you exactly how that works from another great consumer brand.
Let's get some water on that fire. Where's Lieutenant Johnson? Copy 3204 is out of the building. Is everyone else accounted for?
Just love that video. A couple things I want to share with you about that before I show you the second GoPro video. You got to roll back a few years. This is a video that's the result of a viral user campaign where folks were asked to show how they were using their GoPro. Now, notice the name of the product is the hero camera. And who's the hero in the story? The folks who are using the camera. And quite literally in this video, which, okay, after it was selected to win a contest, they sweetened it with some music and some sound effects. But that was literally a City of Fresno firefighter in California showing how he was using his GoPro camera. As a result, among other things, the City of Fresno, after so many people saw this video, wound up with a nonprofit dedicated to helping animals affected by fires. Amazing, right? Now, I want to show you how the story evolved with our next video here. Fast forward, it's COVID now. What's the big deal that you can get as a subtext from what we just saw? Viral campaign, be the hero in your own story by using our camera. Well, during COVID, we were all staying at home, right? So GoPro did another little campaign. And here's one of the winning videos from that campaign.
Let's go. Whoa. Yeehaw.
I love how they evolve the story over time, right? Because the camera is still the hero, but during COVID, you couldn't really use your GoPro camera the way you did before the pandemic, right? So what do we got here? We have a whole campaign oriented. It's still the hero camera. You're still the hero in the story, but you're doing it at home. And I think this is a very inventive example. There are several others. By the way, the first video, that was on YouTube, and it was almost 2 minutes long. This is on Instagram. It's a story, and it's less than a minute. You can see how, as we talked about at the beginning today, digital clutter is just continuing to crowd out our ability to share messages, and it's affecting the length and the delivery, right? Now, I happen to like Instagram stories. I'm not picking on Instagram stories. I'm just saying we need to be aware as business leaders, right? And if you're in the marketing or communications arena, you need to be especially aware that how much time is being given over to sharing your story is shrinking, 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 and moving to new platforms, right? All right, here's your bonus story. Some of you may be working for or with B2B organizations. Many times, people will say to me, okay, you talked about Nike, you talked about Southwest, now we talked about GoPro. Our company's nothing like that. Well, guess what? Your company shouldn't be like that because their story is their story and your story is your story. You can be a B2B organization and share a great story. In fact, I would argue that the more complex your story, the more you need help in sharing that story. Because here's what happens. If you're an engineer or an accountant or an attorney or a healthcare expert, highly likely that the people who are going to hire you aren't as smart about what you do as you are. And guess what? You want to get hired and you want them to keep paying you and you want them to understand the value you're delivering. So you need to have a story that they can understand, right? So I got a little example here for you. I have to say it's about packaging. A company called the Ernest Packaging Company And I mean, how boring is packaging, right? I mean, this is the stuff we throw away when we get what we really want from Amazon or some other online seller, right? Maybe ideally we're thinking about recycling the packaging, but we're not enamored of it, right? Well, let's take a look and see what Ernest Packaging Company did as part of its campaign to make itself more.
Rated W for Whoa.
Some call them the creme de la creme, the pharaohs of foresight, kings of custom. Others simply refer to them as
The E-Team, the threequel. The team has reassembled, and they're ready to put the sleeper hold on bigger and bolder packaging predicaments. You better believe these versatile virtuosos can handle anything that comes their way. They silence the naysayers, muzzle the fearmongers, and bring the booyah to hidden agendas. They pummel production problems with their big picture prowess. And they do it all with the most innovative, high-tech tools and techniques in town. Enterprise Magazine writes, they're not just ready for change, they're ready to rumble. Ecom Quarterly raves, their packaging is cooler than, well, a cooler. Advanced Innovation Illustrated states they test, they validate, they dominate. And Modern Restaurateur writes, they're a weapons-grade force for sushi-grade fresh. Starring Tim Cornflake Wilson, Brian Porterhouse Porter, special guest Scott Gardner as Johnny Vegas, and introducing Lacey Hammer and Darla Daring with Otis the Chicken and the Grand Torino. So check your doubts at the door and step into the ring with the most provocative problem solvers in the packaging arena. The E-Team, where problems get muscled by solutions.
how'd you like that? Capiche?
Yeah, capiche. So reactions, share your thoughts there in the chat pane. I guess we made a few of you cry with the kitten video. You're probably not crying from this one, right? Yeah. Here's what folks usually say about this one, and I have to tell you, I agree. Yes, it's entertaining enough to find out more, which is great. Some people have told me it's a little cheesy and over the top, and I tend to agree. By the way, as I said, this is part of a campaign, so there were many of these, and as someone just noted, it's too long. It is, and guess what? This is the shortest one they did. One of the things that's interesting about this is every person in that video is an actual employee of the company. Tim Cornflake Wilson is actually the CEO, and Brian Porterhouse Porter is actually the head of sales. And then everybody else in that video, including the poor schlub who gets smacked with the chair, is actually an employee of the company. But I agree, it's too long and probably a little too cheesy. So I want to show you. Creativity is great in B2B storytelling, but you don't have to go that far. Let me show you here just a real quick web crawl of their website. Now notice we've got the real E-Team here, right? And I mean, they could have done what they've done here and it would have been just fine. Look at this great messaging. What do a coffee pot and a, I'm sorry, it's going a little fast there. Is she a superhero? Yes, but can you guess which one? Vanessa shook off her expectations, right? Founder of the company, right? Look at all this great background on their story. There's a timeline, right? And at the bottom it says, are you ready to join our team? Here are all our stories, right? That's great stuff. So, you know, they didn't have to go so far as they did maybe with the video, although certainly videos are a great tool, even in B2B, if it makes sense. They're not too long, if they're not too cheesy, right? All right, we're coming towards the end of our formal presentation today. I got a few more things I want to share with you. You know, I mean, if we are what we say we are at WordWrite, why wouldn't we share some client examples? So let's take a look at two so you can understand how we apply the capital S story concept in our own work. Our first company is called the Center for Victory. Now, this began as an organization started by folks who were mental health professionals, social workers. Originally, they worked in nonprofit organizations, but they found that their greatest value was working with leaders of companies and organizations, helping their people achieve their fullest potential. They came to us and wondered, how are we going to explain this story? And, there was professional jargon involved. So we worked with them through our story crafting process to get to the core purpose. They're a certain kind of hero that's very interesting. They're a lot like Nike. They're champions, but not champions in the sense that they win the race and get the gold medal themselves. They make it possible for other people to grab their own brass ring, to get their own gold medal. And that, of course, is also what Nike does. I mean, let's face it, I'm not Michael Jordan, I'm not Tiger Woods, but I can buy Nike apparel and I can make myself part of the same story. If I'm a weekend warrior, I can be the best weekend warrior I possibly can, potentially, by wearing Nike gear, just like these great athletes do. And the Center for Victory sort of angle on that champion story is that by working with them, they can help you achieve your greatest potential. So here's what things look like afterwards. We did all the messaging, the story, identified the archetypal stories that are the champion, married that with the specifics of the organization. When we work with companies, what is often called features and benefits have to be in there, right? I hate that term, features and benefits. Well, whatever is specific about your organization that you originally thought was great aligns with the overall memorable story, right? And in the case of Center for Victory, came all the way through to a new logo and a new tagline. Now take a look at that logo. The O in Victory is a thumbprint to symbolize the individuality of the clients the organization serves. Inside that thumbprint, a leaf to symbolize growth. And then a tagline that explains what kind of champion they are. Your champion for success, right? Not, I'm going to beat my chest and be the champion myself. I'm here for you. I'm going to make you the best you can be by championing your cause. Let's take a look at another one. McClintock & Associates, one of our current clients, love working with them. Nationally recognized accounting firm, deep specialty, post-secondary, for-profit educational institutions. Now, how do you talk about that in a way that people understand it? And working through our story crafting process with McClintock, we came to realize that one of their most valuable assets was their specialized knowledge and strong culture. This phrase emerged in our work with them, wisdom-centric. Guess what? There's an archetypal story that fits with that description. It's called the sage. Now, look, McClintock, they're wonderful people. They're accountants. Accountants do not wander the face of the earth saying, "Hi, I'm a sage, hire me." That's not how a capital S story works. It works like this. Here is a look at the website and branding that was put in place after we went through our story crafting process. Notice the tagline. Sage has become a higher grade of accountants. We're not hitting people over the head with the value they provide. You want people to ask them, what do you mean a higher grade of accountants? And they'd be happy to explain from their vast experience what that means. And here are some preliminary results after we did our first phase of story crafting with the company. We're able to optimize the site, improve the storytelling content, keywords, et cetera, et cetera. And as I said, great client even today. What is the point of the first 40 minutes or so that we've spent together today? Folks, entertaining, educational, and useful. Let's talk about your happy ending for your story. Consider Nike. It's not about the swoosh. It's about Bill Bowerman and Phil Knight. And by the way, that's Bill Bowerman, the legendary track coach on the left there. And Phil Knight, have we ever seen Phil Knight without those sunglasses? He's the legendary CEO of the company responsible for most of its growth. And another one of the former runners for Bill Bowerman. at Oregon. Ask yourself this question. Without the story of Nike, as Steve Jobs pointed out, aren't they just another shoe company, right? Without the story, what's the brand? So ask yourself, without your story, what is the value of your brand? Now, what's the point as business leaders? The bottom line is the bottom line. I hope we've learned today as we scratch the surface of the capital S story concept. Stories deliver results. One of the reasons they do, back to David and Goliath, they're memorable. They're timeless. They transcend culture. And because storytelling is the original communication medium, no batteries required. All you need is a brain and an imagination. They deliver great results. Your capital S story is the most important marketing asset that your organization owns. To put it another way, here's 3 things to think about after participating in the webinar. What is your capital S story? Do you have one? If you have a story, is it driving your brand? And why or why not? Something you might want to think about, right? Maybe you're happy with your story. Maybe you'd like to know more about that. And if you do, I'm happy to connect with you by phone or video and talk it through. Glad to jump on for 30 minutes with you. Please, I wrote a book about this topic, which you'll see in a minute and we'll talk about in a minute. I can't compress into a short, less than 1 hour webinar everything that we've learned about the power of capital S stories to deliver great results for organizations. I'm happy to chat with you, share additional resources with you to help you uncover your capital S story. You're going to get, as downloads today, a number of items. Number 1, Aaron, if you could please share the capital S story worksheet in the chat pane, that would be really great. Okay, folks, you should have a chat pane on your screen, and if you click on the download button, you'll get a 1-page worksheet that you and your leadership team can work through to see what the answers are to those 4 questions. Why would somebody buy, work, invest, or partner with your organization? When we do our trademark story crafting process, this is one of the tools we use early on. We get the leadership team in a room. We say, what do you think your story is? Guess what? There's rarely agreement. That's okay. That's your raw material. Maybe the person who runs HR has a slightly different perspective in this difficult, great resignation, great retention marketplace of how to share the company's story. Maybe the sales team needs to know that. Maybe the CEO needs to know that. Again, the goal is use this tool to help your team uncover the raw material that represents your capital S story. You'll get the slide deck. That'll come as an email that'll take you to the landing page you see here on the screen, which you can go there right now if you would like to. As well, to learn more and get you started, all of those bullets there, there's some additional items for you, and you'll be getting a sample chapter of my book, Finding Your Capital S Story, Why Your Story Drives Your Brand. I want to thank all of you for being with us today and spending the time that you have. And right now, if you're watching this live, Aaron and Trey, let's open it up for any questions that there may be.
All right, so just know that you can share any questions in the chat pane at your right. We'll also be sending out an email later today or tomorrow with all the appropriate links. So all the links that Paul just mentioned and the handout that we sent just now will be available in that email. And any follow-up questions, you can always follow up with Paul at his information right there on your screen.
Yes, please feel free to shoot me an email.
All right.
All right, great. What are the best ways to help my leadership understand the value of our capital S story? That's a great question, and I think that the answer is to demonstrate how great companies have enhanced their ROI by sharing that fundamental story. And certainly, if you want to use our examples, and the McClintock example has some specific numbers in that, please do that. You know, one of the things about the marketing and PR field is a lot of folks say you can't measure success, and that is absolutely, in my opinion, and the work of our firm, 100% wrong. You absolutely can measure everything, especially since so much is done digitally today, right? And if your story is not producing results, then it needs some work. So I would bring it back to results, and I would say to the leadership team, you know, if the attitude is, well, I don't know if we need a story, would you like greater results, right? Have we ever encountered a client where we couldn't find a story? No. Everybody has a story. I have this little vignette in the book. I was trained as a journalist, and when my intro journalism class, there's a guy's retired now, Professor John Lowry. If you ever had the temerity in this class to say there are people who don't have a story, he would make you go out of the quad at Miami University of Ohio, and you weren't allowed to come back and see him until you found somebody with a story. Now, that's kind of an extreme example. In our work, we've never encountered a company that doesn't have a story. You know, when people start companies, when people run companies, there's passion. Where does that passion come from? The passion comes in part from a narrative that's inside their heads that animates them and causes them to want to continue to do the work that they're doing. So there's definitely a story there. The issue is getting it out, uncovering it, and developing it. Oh, how do we feel about the growing interest in companies appointing corporate storytellers? I think that's really great. You know, it's validation that the power of narrative to engage any audience, and most of the time what we see this happening with is employees, right? The corporate storyteller like Nelson Ferris, right? The primary focus for them is pulling the team together, even in the case of Nike, thousands and thousands of employees, and uniting them on a common mission. So it's great to see that where there's corporate storytellers. Great questions, folks. Really appreciate your time. Any other questions? All right, great. Well, for those of you in the Eastern time zone watching this live, I recognize we're bumping right up against lunch. So I'm not going to keep you from the most important midday story that you might engage in, whatever it is you're having for lunch. So thanks again for joining us today. And Aaron, do we have any closing words or reminders for folks?
Sorry about that. Just had to go on stage quick. No closing words, just what I mentioned, that we'll be sending an email, so look out for that. And feel free to share the link to the recording file of this with all of your colleagues, and they can watch at their leisure as well. So thank you all for joining.
Thanks, folks.
Take care.
Have a great rest of your day. Hope to talk to some of you soon.